But there were guns, Mr. Henry.
No, well, as I said, that's why I'm being shot. The only thing that I remember very clearly is somebody saying to me, if you hear it, you're all right.
Did you
because
hear
all
it?
I heard was bang when I looked and the man had shot me full, right? Okay.
Which part you get shot?
I got shot. It was my luck to tell me for being alive is because it was not bird shooting season. So the bullets themselves were not strong enough to penetrate. Every now and again one comes out of my body. I decided to get into politics from 1974, 75, right? So for me it's a long haul to 1980. And if you want to really look at the issues, you have to look at my first speech in Parliament, which is recorded, because in my book, Many Rivers to Cross, I recorded the speeches I made from 1980 to 89. And I did that because I want to see if my covenant with the people is still respected or understood by me. So if I now took my 1980 speech in my book and read it to you, I'm almost deliberating, exactly repeating. Because by then, because of our failure as governance, because remember I fought for change, real change. In fact, I think in some of the issues I said I fought for real change in summarizing in Parliament, right? Not black dog for monkey change, all right? But for the issue of the real change in terms of the structure of the country, and I've continued to believe in that. I continue to believe that we have undercounted the population. I continue to believe we have left the people in a slavery mentality, right? Where they're struggling for their own identity, and therefore we run the governments and the country in we and they, right? Because crime didn't matter until it came above halfway tree. When it came above halfway tree, the respect that we would have for various religions of our own were never ever issues that were addressed. So the 1980 I saw as a real era of introducing a whole new way of thinking. And I was attracted to Mr. Siaga's 100 Village program.
What's that?
I joined his action team.
What's that?
100 Village program for me represented a part of our Afrocentricity. It takes a village to raise a child. And we have written out of our history and out of reality, our Afrocentricity. So having agreed with the people who have taken away our religion, our language, all the issues that we have, we still seem to be waiting on Bakramasa to help us overall. We'll face that now in the issues that we have to do in moving to the whole new world of digital currency, etc., etc., etc. So depending on where you want to go, I want to give it the respect overall.
Mm-hmm.
So in 1980 we came in, deliverance was near, preceded that. We came in and I have to speak as a party at this point in time, in interpreting where we were. So as the issue stands right now, right, we have got an issue that the landslide is now repeated in the era of elections, okay? But in 1980 at the time, we went through a campaign. You know, I myself, you're near area of Millsboro. I lived before the home of Ulysses Estrada. Okay, so I lived before the Cuban ambassador's residence. In that time, etc., leading up to during the period, of course, there was a state of emergency in the 76 period that we had to face. And that's why I think you have to look at the 76 and see what the 1980 produced. Because having lost in 76 my own seat, the seat I now can run, I have had to face and live with the people through 1980. And I did not leave the people from 1976. I stayed with them full time. And I fought their battles and I fought their beliefs and their intent. The battle started in terms of the whole issue of whether it was East or West. It was a whole CIA, KGB, right? You had the Black Power movement, the emerging aspect of the Black Power, the emerging aspect of our own university was achieving its own movements then. So the whole area had to be addressed and issues had to be addressed overall. So all of that compounded itself on the street, on the ground. It still was we and they. It was still the underground economy, the issues that we allowed to thrive and raise. And we got caught up in, not unlike we might be caught up now in issues that may arise coming forward. So you had a left-right situation, you have a socialism against capitalism, all of that was introduced, right? All the issues impacted themselves, right? And of course we got caught up in the Cold War. So all of that manifested itself in whether you went with the right or the left. You recall, of course, that the Bustamante said we're with the West, okay? So that became the part in which we moved forward. And then amalgamations were formed between different political structures. At that time, there was no real right-wing structure pulled together. So all of these things manifested themselves because, as you know, the world says that if America catches a cold, we end up with pneumonia. I don't know where we want to go with that aspect of thinking. But in reality, yes, there was a whole heap of different issues. Drugs played a great part in terms of where you were overall, right? I think I remember one leader saying that, we should take the ganja money and not ask where it's coming from. So just like we face now maybe with COVID, this time we're facing certain issues that the moral position impacts equally. It was the same thing that existed, except that in 1980 it manifested itself more in an immediacy of response. And we moved from not just the hoe and the machete to the gun and the distribution of guns, all of which was tied into, as I said, the world politics that existed and was manifesting itself.
Did you know at the time that this situation was a Cold War and Jamaica would have played a significant role in the Caribbean in this Cold War?
Yes, just as I think that our leadership and our independence leaders into making us an independent country failed to recognize what chattel slavery had an impact on us. We have never governed fully at all times with the basis of the recognition of our social and historical development. We failed to deal with that issue. Therefore, we become reliant. I think that is what Marley and Garvey meant when they said none of us else can free our mind. Because you must remember, after a certain period of your whole educational structure also kept things hidden from you and were not being analyzed. Okay? So, what do you want me to say in relation to that, right? Okay? It's modern history that when you look at the Oxford Dictionary and you look at how they describe the Maroons, you'll understand what I'm talking about. Or the great insult we had with Cameron coming to Jamaica and being allowed to speak in the very forum, which was named after one of the persons whom they assassinated in terms of our fight for freedom. So yes, I'm conscious of that.
So from 1976, the issues were set. And it was clear that, persons were being divided on either lines. Why did you choose to stick with the Jamaica Labour Party at that time?
I said that because the main thrust of that was the 100 Village program that was introduced by Edward Sealva. For the first time, an incoming Prime Minister was not of the tribe of cousins. So you must understand when I speak from a research and reality. Do not forget we cover from this cousin syndrome. Every Prime Minister up until Edward Sealva was a cousin of each other. Shearer related to Sangster, Sangster related to Manley, Manley related to the Clarks, right? Okay? And I could go on. So that in that context, it was because he was what I call part of the new arrivals, the trading section, which came along. And remember that I was fully cognizant and still recognized, people have supported the Rastafarian faith. I was there when I saw it being born, okay? Of course, when people would feel a black country couldn't start a religion, and I think we still probably think that in our minds today, so that, we have to pass it as a religious structure in Parliament for it to benefit.
What role did you play leading up to the 1980 elections?
My role as part of the team that campaigned, quite frankly, openly. I was shot I'm the first campaigning nominated politician to be shot in Yorktown. That was pre-1976. So when 1976 came along, I campaigned on crutches overall because they cut the seat and divided the seat at that point in an agreed fashion. And therefore the area I was fighting for in 1980 was Maypen. And Maypen as Central Clarendon was never ever voted for the Jamaica Labour Party, not even Bustamante won in that area. He won in the larger Clarendon Plains overall. So I played a major part, I think, in relation to the area that I campaigned in and campaigned on. And the philosophy that I'm speaking here was pretty much part of it equally, in terms of I would have supported Black Power. I would have supported the urges and the relationship of how that should be. I would have supported that, however, not through the barrel of a gun, but through the reality of the mind, and that's where I've tried to focus my own thinking. So I would have played a major part, and I would have faced all the issues that would come up in, we ran an election in '76 under a state of emergency. Right? I saw where that issue could manifest itself and affect any different, the broad spectrum. I still have my speech I made when we made the new law in relation to the control of crime, so that I have that to turn to the read in terms of it, and I'm seeing we are almost institutionalizing that, which I said was a serious issue we'd have to address in the future. Because I still maintain that the social issues, the social needs, well, let me put it in a simple term. For you to get out of poverty, you have to think your way out of poverty. And in that context, therefore, we must allow the people to think, and they've shown creatively they can survive. What they have not been able to allow to be doing is to achieve the highest heights. And the highest heights can't be going to Oxford or Cambridge, where you're re-educated, right? Because if God was born in Africa, he certainly couldn't look like the God that I see commonly be portrayed to me growing up, okay? And of course, we wouldn't have banned the growing of hemp. We would have not have been able to relieve those issues, right? And force the people to live outside the control of what they could themselves control. Hence my exposure in terms of following it, but that's going down the wicket with memoirs, right? In terms of 1980, it was a rough time. The laws were not followed closely. They were breached in some respects. Let me say, living down here on Millsboro, my house used to be surrounded with army people. My wife and children would be taken out of bed, right? And searches were done at 2, 3 in the morning.
How did that make you feel?
It made me strengthen my feeling to change the pattern, change the situation. But realizing that, I guess I could describe it best. I ran into an old lady in the police station, right? Whose house had been burglared, and she lost the only thing she had was a radio that she switched on. Nobody was attending to her, okay? And when she explained to me that how important the radio was to her only access, but then who cared about a little radio being damaged, okay? So we didn't cater to the real needs of the people, and therefore it made me want to fight more for the equality of purpose. Okay.
Why was the Jamaica Labour Party dead set against Michael Manley's democratic socialism at the time?
Well, that's not difficult to answer for me, right? I wouldn't say we're available against democratic socialism. I wouldn't say that's against Michael Manley. Michael, whom I knew myself, right? Represented the plantocracy's reaction to the failure of the plantocracy. That's why you must have, when you interview me, you must read the background, and when I saw cousin syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
Because what the Manley Clark era did was really say that if my cousin do it is all right, but if your cousin do it, it's not right. The production element of the country was cut back in many ways, because people used to say, I vote in Labour, I vote in PNP. So it used to be 1 term in, or 2 terms in, 2 terms out. When that was broken by Patterson's 4-win streak, you broke that issue, but up to now you have not broken the minds of the people to recognize that they themselves. So if you ask me that, the division of it has to be related to my own analysis of the history, okay? And if you start with the cousin syndrome and you break that down, I come back to the real change, because you must remember I aligned that to how bananas and chattel slavery built Europe and gave us nothing.
Was the issues in the wider Clarendon area similar to those nationally?
The issues are the same as they are now. They're not dissimilar. It's the issue of how leadership implements the changes that are needed. So, since you came, and I have to always end up coming back at slavery. Seventh Estate rests in central Clarendon. Seventh Estate is most of what you see. If I said to you that in Glenmore there's a place called Hazeldean, which was the 9-hole golf course, right? which the Americans there at Burnham Field, right, used to use for recreation, okay? And the same areas that didn't want water, when you freed the slaves, you said go and fry a free village. You can own the land, you can grow on the land, right? But you can't own the land, and you can only grow on the land, so you eat what you grow. Remember, you weren't able to vote if you didn't have land ownership. So all of these things is what you have to look at, and I thought 1980 manifested itself as a time when you would be looking at that in a greater sensitivity of understanding. I still can't understand how we have not addressed land ownership, because the greatest problem you face right now is what is called squatting.
So in 1979, what was the mood like in the Jamaica Labour Party, and what was the political strategy going to be?
The political strategy was going to be one that aligned itself with the economics of the world, right? And the closeness of what we related. Because remember, geographically, we are next door, we're on the doorstep of the United States. And Britain had abandoned the whole of its structure leading up to independence. So that from there on, we would have been looking for the opportunities of the same thing that we're talking about today, jobs, right? Opportunities of education. And we would have capitalized on that. And also the impact of communism in terms of it being sold as being denying the mind to work in a certain way. I.e., we then, perhaps the best way to do that is to look at what kind of socialism we were coming in, because democratic socialism was a new term. Mm-hmm. Okay? So we were not fighting socialism in the context as the freedom of thought and as tied up in the process that was being pushed by the powers that existed. But having made my commitment for representation, and you must remember, it's still in the annals that I challenged the structure of the JLP. I ran against Mr. Seaga on the basis of term limits, right? Fixed election dates, right? Because I thought he was running too often and too long and not winning, okay? So you have to look at my history in the broader sense, okay? Mm-hmm. Of what I do or don't do, or what I have done or will do, right? I try to be consistent.
Right, so you campaigned the island, but given that the political violence was imminent and it was present, how did you defend yourself and indeed the political party?
I think you should listen to what I said earlier. I defend myself by belief in the people. Because in the 1980s, I've just given you the 46 people, houses burned and what have you. But I've had to lie down up at 7th Road to stop the tank going into the area, right? When the reverse process took place in terms of winning or losing. When we were winning the 80 election from 76, right? There was a lot of issues that the people themselves were threatened on, right? And I remember very clearly, right? I have had to block, right? Some things and stand up. I've been a little bit stupid and brave, I don't know. But if
Don't you guns, Mr. Henry?
No, well, as I said, that's why in being shot, the only thing that I remember very clearly is somebody saying to me, if you hear it, you're all right.
Did you
because
hear
all I heard was bang when I looked, and the man had shot me full, right? Okay.
Which part you get shot?
I got shot. It was my luck to tell me for being alive is because it was not bird shooting season. So the bullets themselves were not strong enough to penetrate. Every now and again one comes out of my body because it's about 200 that they got me out. Right? So that there was no doubt. I had seen my houses burn, I'd seen it. So there was no fear in relation to feeling that I was doing the right thing in representing what I now say is the weak from the strong and the rich from the poor.
On that October 30, election day, what was that?
I think election day was probably quite a relief in many ways, because the signs were there that we were the party that was going to be returned.
What kind of signs? You said the signs were there.
The signs were there because the aspect of the rise of violence and the whole aspect of trying to keep the people down related to the fact of that you think just politically you get a certain degree of identity of what it is. And there was no doubt that the people were ready for a change. Now all of that may have been manifested by all what is manipulated, right? Or what was done. I mean, the timing of the arrival of whether you hear communists are coming, right? some of the issues that were not known by the people, which have sent signs, right? Because the Cubans are coming, there's a whole new way to take over, right? They want you 5 votes, all the propaganda was catching on. Some real, some untrue, some true overall. And I've always prided myself on being able to predict what the people would want and what they would think.
So election day was smooth?
Election day for me was smooth, yes.
Did you have like returning officers and those things during that time?
Oh yes, no, that you had to be sharp on and everything. There was all different set like fish with that kind of thing. Because you didn't know what was being done. That's where Mr. Seaga's training came in. That is where you see politically, right? We had become more a machinery for winning elections after that too, than for running the country or doing certain things. Okay? So yes, we had all trained all our indoor agents. We drew in his position of training, right? Tivoli's position and knowledge of and I would be manifesting myself because the rural urban issues were part of what happened in the Kingston area. In the urban areas, in the rural areas now, you have a different approach. But from the structure that I had in place, building it, the people that I had, right? And I did a lot of conversions of people who were coming on the basis of the fact that they saw some social involvement in what I was trying to do.
What was the immediate aftermath after you won that 1980 election?
The immediate aftermath was a sense of joy and relief, okay? But in that context, as I said, it wasn't long after I made my first speech. And you must remember when we won in 1980, the country had enough food only for 7 days. Do not forget there was a riots in terms of when they said people were rioting for rice and flour. And I remember I was on the first trip leaving Jamaica that went with Mr. Seaga, right? Bruce Golding, I think Douglas Vaz, right? I think I know of Douglas Vaz and myself, right? Okay? And we went there to meet with a banker to be able to sign a loan to be able to give us food because we only had food to last for 10 days.
So weren't you concerned?
Of course I was concerned, but I wasn't concerned in the sense, if I reflect on it now, in the belief that we would fail, right? So in terms of asking me now, because politics at that time and still has offered to me the opportunity to make real change. So if you're really making change and it's being done clearly in the interest of more than just yourself, then I don't have any fear of that.
Mm-hmm.
I have any fear now in terms of it that I record it and that I'd like to see it done because a number of things that I would like to see done is not yet done.